New York 11 and anybody out there beyond who is joining us, whether you're joining us live or whether you watch the recording later. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this really exciting conversation we are going to have today in anticipation of a very important holiday and date, Juneteenth. And so for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Brittany Ramos de Barros. I use she pronouns, and I am running to fight for New York 11 in Congress right now. But these broadcasts, as those who watch them weekly know, are not about me. It is an opportunity to spotlight so many of the amazing people around the district who have been doing the work for a really long time that has served our communities. And I'm so excited to introduce to anyone who doesn't know and to highlight to anyone who already does, our special guest today, Debbie-Ann Paige, who is a public historian and has done incredible work in multiple different categories of public service. But today, I think most specifically around reclaiming Black histories that have often been erased or forgotten, and particularly locally here in Staten Island. So, Debbie, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. So I would love, for anyone who doesn't know you out there, share just a little bit about your story. How did you come to be connected to this place where we all live, and the work that you've been doing, and share with folks a little bit about that work that you've been doing.
So I migrated to Staten Island on my 5th birthday. And I moved to where I was one of the first families of African descent that moved into Park Hill when it opened. Like when my parents moved in, like literally they were just laying the tiles. And so it was really interesting. I lived my whole life on Staten Island till I was older. I got married. My husband joined the Navy. We traveled for 20 years. And at the end of that, we came back to Staten Island and resettled here. And so that's kind of how I came back here. Over the course of that time, I fell in love with doing genealogy. And when you do genealogy, you realize that you have to really figure out the local history of the place so you can even know where to look for the documents. And so that's kind of what got me interested. So when I came back, I have a degree in business. I hate business. So I decided I was going to start all over and get another degree in history. And in doing that, I realized that as I was growing up, I personally didn't get a lot of African-American history. I got Martin Luther King Had a Dream and Harriet Tubman Saved Millions of Slaves, and I hope you had a good time with that. For me, though, it just seems that when I show up in a place that I am a person of African descent, I'm there. History is about the people. So why aren't we telling these stories? And so I started to dig about 15 years ago now. And in the digging, I just kept uncovering all this stuff. And it's like, what? These people, like Staten Islanders, anyone who's heard me give a presentation, they'll hear me say Staten Island is the Forrest Gump of history. If you can name a thing, like Staten Island shows up in it. And you're
wow.
Like, so yeah, so that's kind of how I got interested in doing the work about Staten Island's, local history.
Wow, what a refreshing take on Staten Island too. I feel like we get like mocked and kind of shamed a lot, and I just love that really refreshing spin of how much it Staten Islanders or Staten Island has played a role in a lot of different important historical eras and things.
Yeah.
So I know I have had the benefit, although it's been a couple of years now, of sitting through one of your longer form presentations. But I'm curious, like, what are some of the, just some examples that are kind of a teaser for folks to learn more about things that you have uncovered that a lot of people maybe wouldn't know about.
So in commemoration of Juneteenth, right? Mm-hmm. Which is the last, the freeing of the last enslaved peoples in Galveston, Texas in 1865, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was read. Mm-hmm. I decided that the bits of information that I would give you would focus on that era.
Okay.
So as we start with Staten Island, as Staten Island is being developed in 1640, there's the Native Americans attack the people who are trying to settle Staten Island. So there's 6 people on Staten Island at that time trying to settle it. 1640. One of them is a person of African descent.
Mm.
So African Americans or people of African descent have been here on Staten Island from the beginning. And so there's a narrative that people tell that, oh, Black people don't live on Staten Island. One person was like, what? You live on Staten Island? And I was like, no, yeah, we've been here forever.
I get that a lot too.
So there you go. So we've been here from the beginning. That's something for us to know. I can kind of push forward a little bit to 1790. So as the country is doing our first census, because the census is a big deal for us right now because of redistricting and those things, right? Well, in the first census, and I'm just focused on this district, it used to be a town called Northfield. So this part of Staten Island used to be called Northfield. And in Northfield in 1790, in the census, there were 44 people who were enslavers who had enslaved 130 people here on Staten Island in just that one town out of the 4 towns that were here on Staten Island.
Wow.
So slavery has also been a major part of Staten Island's history.
Wow.
That we don't often know and or talk about. Additionally, we have the quarantine station, which is right next to the ferry, where the Lighthouse Museum is.
Yeah.
That's where and so if you think about there, and then you go all the way up to the courthouse, where the new courthouse is, all of that land was called the quarantine station. And the law was in 1799, the law was that any and every ship that was coming into New York Harbor would have to stop here on Staten Island for 2 to 3 days to be quarantined to make sure that everyone was free of disease. And so in that, I've been able to uncover 2 slave narratives that talk about their escape from enslavement that land here on Staten Island for a short time and then make their way elsewhere to freedom.
Wow.
And so also, let me think. So we also just commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa race massacres.
Right.
And there's a map that talks about the different massacres that have happened between, from 1863 all the way up until, Tulsa and forward. And I want to say that I want to talk about the Civil War draft riots that took place in 1863. The North was losing the war at that point. African Americans could not enlist in the war at that point. And there was a draft that was being instituted, and the majority of people who were about to be drafted were young Irish men, typically poor, but they also had, there was also a racial schism between the Irish and people of African descent. They rebelled against it, and a riot broke out. And I would say a race massacre happened here. We should no longer call it a riot. We should call it a race massacre because they attacked, they burned the orphan asylum in Manhattan. They attacked African Americans. They hung them. They killed them. But those same draft riots spilled over into Staten Island as well and lasted more than 5 days. And they terrorized the neighborhood of what we now call Stapleton, where I would say a large majority of African Americans lived here on the North Shore. So you had 2 major African American communities on Staten Island during this time. You had what I call the McKeon Street neighborhood and or Rocky Hollow on the North Shore, and you had the Sandy Ground community on the South Shore. And those 2 communities often work together in terms of the Underground Railroad as well. And so as this mob of men was, moving along and burning and pillaging the African and terrorizing the African American community here, there were a few who stepped in to help them, to assist. They tried to burn the UAME church in Stapleton. They were, in one story is that they went to a house and a lot of the houses in Stapleton, and they broke out all the windows, and they tore down all the doors, and they took out all the furniture, and they threw everyone's furniture in the middle of the street, and they set it afire. People were jumping into, down by West Brighton. They were jumping into the Arthur Kill in order to escape the mobs. They were trying to attack the white abolitionists that lived here. And so it was a horrible time here. So I want to really highlight that while we have empathy as a community for Tulsa, we need to look inward and see what it has done to us and who we are as a community as well.
Wow.
And those are just a few of the things that so what I've done is I've created an app, and it's called the Staten Island African American History Tour app. You can either do it virtually, or you can do it actually physically on site. Take the app with your phone and go to these different places, and you'll get different information about each of these sites that are across Staten Island. It's, I think, upwards of 120 entries, and we're hoping to expand that over the course of this year as well.
Wow. And now I've heard about this app, but I have to admit, I haven't gotten to go through it in person yet. And it's one of the things we were actually talking, we were like, maybe we should do that as an event at some point, get as part of the campaign, right? Like get folks who are interested together, and we can all go through the tour together, because I feel like it would be so powerful.
So one of the things on Saturday, if anyone
this is a good, okay. I don't want to interrupt you, but I know I got a little out of order here. So we heard the brief mention, right, that upcoming, we have Juneteenth, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong. I want to say that someone said that this is one of the first big Juneteenth celebrations that we've ever had on Staten Island. Is that correct to your knowledge?
That's correct, to my knowledge.
Okay, yeah.
And what they've done is they've gathered up most of the organizations of color that are led by people of color. And we're all gathered on the campus of Snug Harbor, and there's going to be reenactments. There are going to be poetry. There's going to be informational information. There's going to be health information. I mean, just a host of different things that we brought a lot of these organizations together, to really celebrate this notion of freedom, to examine, how far we've come, in terms of freedom, but also to celebrate that, we find ourselves here.
Yeah, absolutely. And that we have a long way to go.
And we have a long way to go. But a part of that celebration, I'll be doing kind of overviews of the app. So I'll be walking through it and just kind of giving highlights similar to what I'm doing now.
Amazing. Okay, so we just dropped the link to the event for anyone who wants, in the comments, for anyone who wants more information. You can also find it pretty easily by just searching Juneteenth Staten Island in Facebook, and they'll be able to get a chance to get oriented by you in person, by the creator, and the historian who researched a lot of the information that went into it. That's amazing.
Yeah, I wanna highlight that there were two historians previous to me that was doing this really hard work for a long time. And that was Richard B. Dickinson, who our Staten Island Oggs chapter is named after, and Sister King, Evelyn Morris King, whose father was, just an amazing pillar on Staten Island as well. I-61 is named after him. They've been doing the work as well, and I want to make sure that I acknowledge that they've done a lot of this work. They did it a little differently than I've done it, but certainly I'm not the first to do this.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's so important to honor ancestry and lineage in our work, not just in our lives, but in our work. And it's something that I think we easily forget because we're not always conditioned in our kind of work cultures here to do that. So thank you for that.
And if I could,
Please.
I would love to just highlight my friend Faith D'Alessandro, who without her, the app wouldn't happen, because she really helped to focus me and was the project manager on it and was like, hey, can we get this done? Can we get that done? And so she was really able to focus me and get me oriented to really flesh it out and do so that we could bring it to the world. And the app has been pretty successful. We've had people all over the world actually take a look at it. So we're really encouraged by it.
That's amazing. And I think it's so important because of this theme. You know, I've heard Kelly Villar and many others say this, is just like, we've internalized so many terrible narratives about our own home here. And I think that it's so powerful to really make sure that we're not being ahistorical, right? That we're really acknowledging both the pain and the power
Exactly.
of the legacy that we are, you know, kind of blessed to live in here and to have a different outlook.
Exactly.
Without trying to erase, right, the problems and the
right. Because, you know, I sometimes the language is hard to listen to, but it's the truth as I see that it happened, and I typically use the words of the day, newspaper articles, and that kind of thing in order to tell these stories. So it's not Debbie saying that; it's the people who are saying it, whether it's, you know, whether it's accurate or not. It's still a reflection of the time of what the people heard. Similar to social media and what we have, you know, what happens to us today. We do have to parse out, you know, and strengthen what's, you know, what's accurate and what's not. But the history of Staten Island's African American past is really powerful. It's really powerful. We, you know, they've struggled through so many difficulties, but still are here, persevering and doing well and achieving. And so, while it may be a long road, it's a very powerful, empowering road.
Yeah. And there's this kind of pop social media acknowledgement happening, I think, in a lot of Black movement spaces that I've been a part of, and on social, you know, in those kind of like sectors of Twitter or whatever. But saying, you know, I don't want to be resilient. I don't want to be acknowledged for being resilient anymore, because I don't want for there to just be this complacency with the fact that me and my people have had to be so resilient because we've been so abused for so long. And I feel like, you know, I want to acknowledge that, and that that's so real and so valid, and that it's so, you know, that like I also want to take pride in my ancestors and in those, you know, whether they were my blood ancestors or ancestors who laid the groundwork for us today, right? Like, and I do want to acknowledge that and celebrate that and take pride in the way that people found ways to be creative, to create art and food culture and language and all of these legacies, right, in the worst of conditions.
Exactly. Absolutely. Exactly. And so it's why I think it's so important to tell these stories. I know that once people hear them, there's almost a dawning that comes over people, that they go, oh, this is why we struggle. This is, but we're here. And then we look to see what they've done to overcome, and how do we chart our way through the future. You know, a lot, the logo that I use for the app is the Sankofa bird, right? So historically, you have to know your past in order to move forward into your to exist in your present and move into your future. And I think it's apropos of who we are as people, you know, as a community. So if you look at Staten Island as an overall community, they've had to bear a lot of, you know, harsh things, but they're still here. And we have, you know, for the first time, we have how many people of color that are running for city council, you know, on the North Shore. And this is incredible. Like this is literally incredible to see this. And so while I too am full of empathy for those who no longer want to just consider themselves resilient, the resiliency is what makes us who we are. And I would highlight that for those who are weary. Listen to the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice, and stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, but we are here and we persevere.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There is a rendition of the Black National Anthem that was done for the Black National Convention that M4BL helped put on with other organizations this past summer. My husband and I watched the live stream in our living room. We sat down with our snacks and everything as if we went to the movies because we were so excited about it. And it's just so moving. Maybe I will see if I can dig it up really quickly and we can even end the broadcast with it. I think that would be, since you brought it up, maybe that would be a beautiful way to end and share that with people.
Absolutely.
But I also just, I have to say, I was exposed to Juneteenth and Juneteenth celebration from my family, but my Southern Black family in particular. And I've always wondered, is this more of a thing in the South in terms of celebration, because Juneteenth acknowledged it had so much to do with emancipation in the South. And by that time, even though we know that it was not only the South, right, who participated in enslavement. Right. And so I am really curious, what Juneteenth, if anything, right, has it been something that was practiced or acknowledged growing up for you growing up mostly here in Staten Island? And why do you think it's important that we're taking the time to celebrate it now?
So I get it. That's a multi-layered.
Yeah.
Sorry. Multi-layered.
A lot of questions at you there.
Right. So one is no. I personally did not celebrate Juneteenth. I did not know about Juneteenth actually until we moved away and moved to the South as well. And while in the South, we were exposed to it. But Juneteenth it was celebrated mostly in the South, and then during the course of the Great Migration, as people moved out of the South, particularly Alabama, Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and they moved to the Midwestern states because the migration went this way, right? So depending on where the states were, you went straight up typically. And so the celebrations actually expanded there, and then they died down somewhat. And they started to revive them somewhere around the 1970s. So a lot of people weren't necessarily celebrating them. I'm not that old. I got age, but not not quite there yet. So so I think it's important for us to really understand the notion of stolen labor, right? So when the 13th Amendment freed permanently those who were enslaved, right? It was done initially by the Emancipation Proclamation, which was a presidential order, an executive order. And Lincoln wanted to make sure that became permanent. So he pushed and cajoled folks to pass the 13th Amendment. But there is a caveat, right, in the 13th Amendment for where slavery can still exist in the United States, where those who are duly, duly convicted of a crime.
Right.
So while we celebrate those who were freed in Galveston, we should look to see what's happening currently today within the penal system, within the private penal system, that labor is still being stolen from mostly our brothers and sisters of African descent.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. I think if anyone is just being introduced to this idea and wants to learn more, Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, really deepened and shifted my understanding of just the systems I was seeing around me and kind of making sense of them in a historical context. And I think that is so important.
Ava DuVernay's 13th also really
on Netflix. Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely explains it. One thing I wanted to highlight, that while we are celebrating Juneteenth, it's always curious to me how we just kind of skipped over the emancipation here of New York, right? So New York emancipated and or released from enslavement people of African descent July 5th, 1827. And so we really should be celebrating that as New Yorkers, right? So while I appreciate Juneteenth, we really need to have another campaign that says, hey, because slavery happened on a state by state basis, which is another thing that people don't actually recognize. So while people were released from enslavement in 1827 in New York, New Jersey, their Gradual Abolition Act didn't release people from enslavement until 1832.
Wow.
So and these are late. It's pretty much one generation from the full, 1863 Emancipation Proclamation. And so I would hope that we could really give a push to our legislators now to acknowledge this 1827 date for us, that we could celebrate as New Yorkers, our release from freedom, or release from enslavement into freedom.
Wow.
Because here on Staten Island, as people are emancipated, there are almost 700 people who are still enslaved on Staten Island, that were released from enslavement. And then, similar to what happened to those in Galveston, where are you supposed to go? What kind of livelihood do you have? General Granger says, go back to the plantations where you worked, but this time work for fees. Well, same thing here on Staten Island. Most went back to the plantations where they were enslaved and tried to now navigate, wages for their labor, which you could assume wasn't necessarily a easy task to accomplish.
Yeah, I can imagine. What kinds of there were plantations here?
Yes.
Okay, what kinds of plantations?
I call them work farms, right?
Right.
And so there is a Ira K. Morris, who is a Staten Island historian, whose book people typically use in order to tell Staten Island's narrative, or historical narrative, says that nearly every farm on Staten Island enslaved someone.
Wow.
At least one. And typically, if they weren't owned, then they were rented.
Wow.
So Staten Island remained rural, while Manhattan and Brooklyn, well, the other boroughs are building up. Staten Island is remaining rural. Like, I remember they still had farms in 1969, and you still had to drink warm milk from the dairy. So there is this notion that if you go through the census, and there's census as early as 1755 that tell you who had these work farms across Staten Island that enslaved people of African descent.
Wow. I did not know that. I knew that Staten Island had been much more rural in the past, but I did not know that it had been agrarian. That's so interesting.
Yeah. And they didn't start to, factories didn't kind of start to grow up until the 1880s, 1890s, typical to other places. But the majority of it still remained agrarian. Wow.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I think it is so important. So what you said, it was in July. What was the July date you said?
So the Gradual Emancipation Act is it's July 4th, 1799. Anyone born after July 4th, 1799 was born free, but you remained indentured basically until, if you were male, till you were 28, and if you were female, till you were 25. So they were still stealing your labor, but you knew at the end of that time frame that you would at least be free. But those are your golden years of working, right? In those days. So 6 of these, half a dozen of another. But so after July 4th, 1827, everyone was free. And on July 5th, 1827, Staten Island had a huge celebration similar to what Juneteenth was to Galveston, all those years later.
Wow. Okay. So what date? Because I'm thinking, I'm like, well, July's coming up, and you make a really good point. So I feel like we should do something, even if it's not an official New York thing yet. It would be awesome to organize something. And maybe that's when we get folks together who want to do the walking tour together or something as a way to honor the day.
Sure. That's an idea.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have, obviously, there, I'm sure we have to check schedules and all these fun things, but I really like that idea, or at least around that time, as a way to kind of commemorate that, because I think that your point that it's really important. Something that I've noticed is that there is a tendency amongst us, New Yorkers, to talk about the South in ways that are pretty condescending, right? As if like, oh, we are so evolved here,
right?
Backward Southerners, right? The people who fought for slavery, right? And I'm just like, all right. So I do think that piece about us reflecting on our own history, not from a place of like shame or anything like that, but because it is important to like not oversimplify that history, right? And that
exactly truth. Because the entire history, slavery, the entire history, free people of color, it's all very complicated. And for us to say North good, South bad does everyone a disservice.
Yeah. In the present, right?
And it's also not true.
Right. It's not true. And it does us a disservice in the present because it prohibits us from really grappling with the ways that those impacts are still playing out in our systems. And
right.
And we need to be clear-eyed and understand roots in order to understand how to build something that actually meets our values and our needs.
Right. I think so.
Yeah. Well, Debbie, do you prefer Debbie-Ann, the full Debbie-Ann, or just Debbie? I was a little unsure.
Debbie's fine.
Okay. Well, Miss Paige, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have done such incredible work. Your work is a real treasure to the community and to all of us. And so thank you so much for everything that you've done, everything that you continue to do. I'm curious, we've shared the link to the app. I hope everybody goes and checks it out. I definitely am excited at some point, whenever it makes sense, to do a walking tour with anyone out there who wants to do it, go through it in person together. But are there any other resources? Oh, and we've mentioned the Juneteenth on June 19th, this Saturday celebration. First of its kind, at least that we know of, in Staten Island. So it's very exciting. I feel like it's a really powerful moment to participate in that and be a founding participant, if you will.
Right.
So at Snug Harbor. So come by, bring the family, whether you live in Staten Island or not. I think that this history is really important for everyone, and this cultural practice is really important for everyone to participate in. And are there any other things that you would want to share, resources or opportunities that folks should know about if they want to learn more?
There's a gazillion and one, but if you're interested in African-American history and genealogy, you can check out our Staten Island AHGS. It's the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. You can join our chapter, or you can join the national organization, and it's aahgs.org. If you go there, you can find a local chapter in nearly all of the states. So you don't have to join the Staten Island one. You can go anywhere. And so I think they're a really good resource for us.
That's awesome. Yeah. I didn't realize that was something that a layperson could get involved with. So I guess I thought that you had to be like a historian who knows what they're doing.
It's what makes it so good is that, you have all levels of people who have been doing research. Some just started yesterday and some have been doing it for 50 years. And so it runs the range. And so assistance is there on all levels.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. That's great to know. And if you think of anything else, I know that there's like a bunch. If you think of anything else, I know you shared a couple others, I think, with us as well. So we'll make sure to drop all of the links that Debbie-Ann shared with us in the comments for anyone who is excited to find ways to plug in and learn more. And beyond that, oh, go ahead.
I would just say the Staten Island Museum is working on creating a lot of African American historical tools for people. Mm-hmm. And then there's always the Sandy Ground History Museum,
right,
on the South Shore. They're always a good resource as well.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
I'm done.
No. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And yeah, so everyone, I will be at the Juneteenth celebration. I hope that you will be. I'll see you there. Debbie-Ann. And thank you so much for joining us, and to everyone who tuned in. And again, for all the work that you do for the community in multiple ways, some of which I know we didn't even talk about today. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Anytime.